I got the wild hair that I wanted to play football again.
Really?
And so I decided to go out for 150s. And that's where RD and I really got to know each other, was 150s. I started playing my senior year, first year, for the first time since high school.
Welcome to the Courage Never Quits podcast, where members of the West Point class of 1986 tell their stories. I'm your host, Paul LaFontaine. My guest today is John Cannon, Cullum number 43006. We'll hear about John's journey from the 150-pound football team as a Firstie to flying Blackhawks in Desert Storm. As always, the views expressed in this podcast are those of the participants and not of West Point, the Army, or any organization, most particularly Aero Electronics. John Cannon, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
It's so great to see you because it's been a long time since you and I hung out, but really you were just down the hall from me at the academy. You were an H3 and I was an I.
Yes, H3. I believe we were on the fourth or fifth floor of the barracks, if I remember right.
We were. So we all kind of got to know each other walking. Usually cutting through the barracks, trying to avoid the cold was the way we all got to know each other because we were always trying to use the heat.
Yes, I hate the cold. I hate the cold for sure.
So you're in Dallas, Texas now.
Yes, I'm in Dallas, and I've been here since 1995.
And what prompted the move there? I see lots of pictures on Facebook of a lot of family, so I imagine that was part of it.
Well, actually, my family is originally from Alabama,
Mhm.
so I could have wound up in that area. But when I decided to get out, I knew I wanted to go into something tech related. And at the time, it was really the Bay Area, Boston, or Texas for tech related jobs. And I knew that every time I went through the DFW airport, the Dallas airport, it was the most beautiful women in the world. And that's what really led me to decide, well, hey, out of those three, I think Texas is a place to go. And it turned out to be a great decision.
You know what? I've always been so similarly guided and it's never steered me wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Good for you. And so 95, so that was early in your career and you've been there the whole time.
Yes, I got out during the Clinton drawdown, as I call it, when we had the reduction in force and they were offering the separation incentives after Desert Shield and Desert Storm. That was really the prompting I needed because I saw that with the drawdown in the military, if you stayed, you were going to be deployed probably 8 months out of the
Right.
year. And in aviation, of course, once you've had your company command, the fun jobs are kind of over. You know, your flying jobs are over. You're going to be a staff officer until possibly getting to be a lieutenant colonel or colonel and getting to fly again. So I decided, hey, they'll pay me to get out. Fun jobs are kind of behind me. It's time to go.
Absolutely. Wonderful. So talk a little bit about how you met your wife and take it from there.
Well, my wife and I actually worked together for a period at Aero Electronics, which was a semiconductor or is a semiconductor distributor, selling the processors, memory logic, all that good stuff. I hired her as a field salesperson when I was general manager. So for a brief period, I tell people that I was her boss for a short time. Now she's my boss, of course, but that's how we got to know each other. She has since gone back to her original area, which is oil and gas. So she is a database technician in the oil and gas industry. What she does is really help them determine what their borrowing base is, what their capital situation is at any time. Very intelligent, very detail oriented, type A personality that would have made a great army officer. I mean, really, truly. my
Household runs like a
my
top then.
For the most part, yeah, yeah. I have two daughters. One who followed Leanna into petroleum engineering. She's a Texas A&M graduate and works in oil and gas now. And then our younger daughter, Madeline, is a nurse, graduate of University of Arkansas, and she works at Baylor Hospital in downtown Dallas.
Okay.
So I have one daughter on the medical side, like my job is, and then one daughter who's in oil and gas.
Okay. But everyone, but it all centered
And
somewhat in Texas and Dallas, and so you have your family.
yeah, I think they're great industries to be in, and certainly in the Dallas area, medical and oil and gas are great things. And
Now, talk about
and
your
then both of
grandchildren,
those,
because I was mentioning before we started recording that you have two objectively cute grandsons, right?
yeah, I have two grandsons and now a 4-month-old granddaughter as well. So I have three grandchildren. George is going on 2.5 and looks like a mini Heath Ledger is what we describe him as. Blonde hair, brown eyes, somehow a gorgeous little kid and very fun. Carson is about a year and a half old and is very much the same personality as my daughter. Very, very focused, very a little bit frustrated at not being able to move around and express himself
Right.
all that much yet. That's how she was when she was a child. And then our youngest is Annie, and she is 4 months old. She was born 6 weeks premature, so that was quite a trying time. But everything is great, and she's developing chubby cheeks
There you go.
and rolls around her stomach just like everyone. But yeah, we are very lucky that they are here in the Dallas area, and we see them most every weekend.
Good for
So
you.
it's really good in that regard.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And one funny story is that, I raised two daughters, and when the two grandsons were born, I was like, I don't know how to be a boy dad. How in the world do you be a boy dad? And so I've had to learn all that stuff along the way. I think I'm doing all right with it, but it's definitely different because they are nonstop energy.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's go all the way back now to your childhood. You grew up in Alabama. What was your brothers, sisters? What was your situation growing up?
Um, my parents are both educators. My father taught political science at Auburn University. So War Eagle, RD, no roll tide from me. So keep that in mind, RD.
Staying out
um,
of that.
but but we but but we were huge Auburn fans growing up. My dad in political science. My mother taught at the high school. She was an English teacher at the high school. So education was a huge thing in my house. A lot of reading, a lot of current events, avoiding math as much as possible.
Right.
Don't know how I got into West Point given that, but yeah, avoiding math as much as possible. I have a sister who's about 3 years younger than I am, and she still lives in Birmingham, Alabama. But Auburn is my home. And growing up, really everything was around sports, school, nothing much ever having to do with anything mechanical like cars, and
Right.
nothing really having to do with weapons or hunting or anything like that, like a lot of my friends. So it was really, hey, what sport are we playing this season? Is your homework caught up? And let's go from there.
And what attracted you to West Point as a place to go?
Honestly, if you remember the poster, much of the history we teach was made by those that we taught. That was it. I've always loved history, and that poster really hit home with me. It had Eisenhower, Patton, Bradley, Grant, Lee. Those are the ones I remember. I think there might have been one more on that poster, but that poster really, truly hit home with me, and I took that message to heart.
Yeah.
Um, through my dad's connections in political science, he could get access um, to our state senator, to our local representative, and I was able to meet with those people a couple of times, and that really helped me to see what they did and how they talked about the military and the academies in particular. So that's what really drew me to it.
A lot of sports, you said, growing up. Were you academics and sports, more academics than sports? How did you present yourself to the academy as a candidate?
I would say, as someone who was reasonably decent at a multitude of different things. So maybe the Renaissance type person. I was not exceptional at any one area by any means. I was pretty good at a lot of different areas. Sports, academically, leadership organizations, and then having people who would write great recommendation letters for
Hmm.
me. But there was nothing that really stood out. Just being a well-rounded person, I think.
What were your sports growing up?
Football, baseball, those were the main ones. I loved basketball, but the problem was that I was 5'10" by the time I was in seventh grade and never grew after that.
Yeah, yeah.
So up until that point, I loved basketball, but everybody caught up with me, and plus they could jump.
Got it. So, going to the academy itself, in terms of getting ready for it, did you prepare for it, or did you ever visit it, for example, or?
I had never visited, no, never ever visited. The closest I came to, to really associating with people, I had a another person there in my hometown of Auburn who graduated in probably the early 50s, and he was the most recent Auburn person to go to the academy. So that was a point of reference. The guy who was the liaison officer, for lack of a better term, over at Fort Benning, did interact with him a few times, but no, there wasn't a lot of interaction with anybody at the academy.
I showed up without ever having been there.
Yeah.
I mean, really, like today, nobody would ever even conceive of going to a place without going for visits and all
Yeah.
that stuff, right?
But at the time, it seemed normal for some reason. I don't know why.
An analog age.
Yes.
Arriving at the academy, we all had a shock. What was it like as a kid from Alabama arriving at West Point?
I vividly remember so many people just wanting me to talk so they could haze me over my accent. I had I guess a pretty significant Alabama accent at the time, and the upperclassmen being in formation and just saying, "Hey, Cannon, talk. Don't care what you talk about, just talk." And they would get such a kick out of me just talking in my Southern accent. So that was eye opening to me. Another thing that was really kind of eye opening was that no longer did it matter what effort you put forth on something. It was all about results. It was all black and white. You either did it or you didn't. And that was kind of a shock to me coming from the background I came from, where my parents were maybe a little bit softer and less of disciplinarians, and they were quick to praise if you'd put forth a great effort, whether you accomplished your goal or not. So that was pretty shocking to me.
Right. You were in G4, so we actually our paths were similar because I was in the Fourth Regiment as well. Talk about Beast Barracks. What was the a vivid memory from Beast Barracks that you fondly recall?
Oh gosh, that I fondly recall. I remember just being very homesick. I mean, thinking, what have I gotten myself into? That was part of it. Like I said, getting used to everything being judged on results rather than effort. That was a key point. Um,
You were in G4 as a plebe. How were the guppies? The guppies, right?
oh, I had a lot of fun. A lot of good people there. I remember it's where I met Rick Minicozy. He was a great person to get to know there. Just Steve Merkel, it seems, was there as well. We had a really good time there with the people. That's one thing I always look back on is the people, and coming from a small town in Alabama, just realizing that, hey, it doesn't matter where a person lives, where they're from, what they look like. Just they can be good people. They probably are good people. Give them a chance to prove they are good people before write somebody off for the way they look or the way they act or where they're from. So that was another key lesson for a small town guy from Alabama to learn.
How did you keep yourself kind of moving forward as a plebe? What was your strategy mentally?
Um, survival was a big part of it. Also, just getting the mindset that, hey, it's not like you can quit and go home. I mean, you can't do that. You have to succeed. You have to somehow learn to thrive with this. think how humiliating and embarrassing it would be if you did go back home. Can't do that, and get all that other stuff out of your brain about what fun your high school buddies are having now at college. Get that out of your brain and just thrive, do the best you can in your current situation. And I throughout the 4 years, at times I took too much of the philosophy of, well, if you sleep 6, 8 hours a day, then you reduce your amount of time at the academy by a year or so. I regret that in hindsight.
Yeah,
That was one of the dumber things I did, not taking advantage of all the opportunities that were there and just trying to make it go away at times. So that's a regret and something I would tell today's cadets not to do.
just embrace it all. Yeah, that's good. Uh, yeah, I think, and none of those strategies worked. 4 years was 4 years, right?
Exactly,
At the
exactly,
end of the day,
exactly.
you know.
But I sure spent a lot of time, I think, feeling sorry for myself and thinking about all my friends who were,
Yeah,
home at Auburn University, going to games, watching Bo Jackson, all that fun sort of stuff, and here I was missing out on it.
yeah,
I think I felt sorry for myself too much at times.
yeah. I think there was a little more of that than we all admit, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So heading over to H3, yearling
Mhm.
year, how was that transition? What was it like heading in there as a yearling?
I I thought that was really good. I think going into being a yearling, some of my biggest concerns had to do with the courses that would be coming up on the academic calendar. I mean, I think that's what scared me to death is, oh my goodness, these courses are starting to get really, really hard. You're having to worry about things like electrical engineering. You're having to worry about things like physics and chemistry and stuff like that. And that was the biggest shock I faced, I think, coming into yearling year. It wasn't so much the switching of companies because I ran into some great people in H3. I just was glad to still be there, have a little bit of freedom, and be able to move around and finally focus on the studies portion of it a little bit.
Yeah, you had a good group in H3.
Yeah, had some good friends there. Pat Daly, still keep in touch with him on a regular basis. He's a real good dude. Steve Sabia is another one that I remember fondly. Doug Bedell and Andy Eager. Just some good people that I ran across and had as roommates from time to time.
Yeah. What did you pursue as an upperclassman in terms of interests? I mean, we were studying harder, so it was busier. And what kept you busy other than academics?
Yeah. Well, I actually started winter of plebe year. I decided to play rugby. Never played rugby in my life, but decided to play rugby. And so went down to Buffalo Soldier Field, and at my first rugby practice, I quickly learned that you don't lead with your head when you tackle. I had been a football player. You lead with your head, you put your head on the ball. And I quickly learned that's not what you do. I wound up very first rugby practice at the hospital to have my ear, the top of my ear sewn back together.
Really?
So that was a very quick lesson. um, but I played rugby all the way through Cal year. So for 3 years, I played rugby, played mainly wing forward, which is an outside position in the scrum, where you have a little bit of tackling responsibility, but really no ball carrying responsibility. So I did that for 3 years. Met some really great people. T. Williams is a great friend. Enjoyed the time that I got to know him on the rugby team. So that was the first 3 years. Then I got the wild hair that I wanted to play football again.
Really?
And so I decided to go out for 150s. And that's where RD and I really got to know each other, was 150s. I started playing my senior year, first year, for the first time since high school. And
Amazing.
made the,
I have so much
yeah,
respect for that. You just said I'm football, and I mean that's really cool.
I decided I just wanted to play football one more time. Yeah, and of course I weighed probably 175 at the time, so Fat Boys was completely out of the question. I went in and met really good guys like Steve Bradley, Chris Townley, Cliff Maynor, Ted Johnson, people like that who who encouraged me, who brought me into the fold of the 150s team, and played offensive tackle of all positions on 150s that year as a senior. But that was a lot of fun to do that one last time.
What a credit to the academy! You can show up as a senior and play football on the 150s team. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that we had people on the team like John Magnus, Tommy Hayslip, who were pushing 180 pounds on a regular basis and dropping 20 pounds per week in order to make weight.
That's yeah.
Now, 35 years later, it's no longer 158 as the weigh-in weight. I think it's either 175 or possibly
Is that
180,
right?
just because of how people's bodies have evolved over time.
So did you guys just stop eating? How did you cut weight? It was just like I know wrestlers do it as well. What was your strategy?
Yeah, so the best example, and I know because he lost a heck of a lot of weight. He lost more weight than I did, but Chris Townley would essentially stop eating on Sunday morning. So he would stop eating on Sunday morning. He would go on an extremely long run to get that process of losing weight
Yeah.
started and eat nothing until weigh-in, which was Wednesday after practice. So essentially 4 days of not eating, very little water, lots of steam room and sauna. You do your weigh in, and then you gorge, gain back probably 15, maybe 20
For the
pounds
game.
in that 48-hour period before the game. Yeah. And we would always meet at Grant Hall on Thursday night for ice cream. We would eat like as much ice cream as we possibly could on Thursday night just to get our weight back up. So yeah, that's how it was done.
The intensity of studies and different activities we had, and just it was a full on schedule. And you guys were doing that extreme weight cutting. It's amazing you made it through just physically. I mean, because that's very hard on the body what you were doing.
Yeah, like I said though, I tried to sleep a lot to make it all go
Right.
away.
And we were 22 years old, so we get away with pretty much.
Yeah, right.
Now, aviation. What was it that attracted you to aviation?
The fact that it wasn't infantry, the fact that it wasn't infantry, the flight pay, um, the idea of flying.
Right.
Um, I was attracted also to the fact that, the basic course in flight school, we're in Alabama, so I would be close to home, close to friends, that type of thing. But like a lot of people, it came down to me to infantry or
Yeah.
aviation. And, Pat Daly, he was a roommate a lot of those years in H3 and would say, why do you want to choose to be miserable? Why do you want to choose to embrace the suck in infantry when you can go into aviation? You'll be sleeping on a cot most of the time when you are in the field. You'll have some creature comforts, that type of thing. And finally, that message got through to me. But truly, it was down to infantry or
Yeah.
aviation, and kind of a on the spur of the moment
Well,
decision.
you think about the culture of the day; those were the two branches, right? I mean, infantry and
Oh yeah,
aviation were the
yeah,
two. And then, so you
yeah.
had to have your grades had to be decent to get into aviation, other than physical. You had to have good eyesight, et cetera. So, what was your course of study there?
I focused entirely on history courses as much as possible. History was my thing, so I was a HPA, area of concentration or whatever it was we called it. But like I said, I tried to avoid math courses as much as
Yeah.
possible, just do the bare minimum when it came to that. So I really enjoyed American history, anything having to do with politics, military history, that type of thing.
Now, did
That's where
you didn't focus? You were just a general history major with a H focus.
um, how would it be described? I mean, I definitely was not a major, more general, maybe American history, if anything.
I think that's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm, that's a wise decision, really, if you think about it. That's great.
And I love to read. I love to read, so that's a big thing. That the reading load was never a problem to me because you do have a lot of reading if you're a history major. But I had no problem with that and enjoyed most of the things I had to read.
So here's the secret, my friend. When you eventually retire, reading and taking naps is the enjoyment. So, like, you got a head start on it.
Good, good deal. Now, if I could just work in our dogs, taking the
Dogs,
dogs for a
grandkids,
walk, I'd be
reading,
all
napping.
set.
That's that's the payoff,
Good.
right?
Sounds like a good plan.
So you got a lot of sports uh, focused on and got good, decent enough grades to for aviation. When aviation, what was your first assignment?
So after flight school, went to Korea, flying Hueys. So there were probably close to 10 of us West Point lieutenants, class of 86, Huey lieutenants who showed up at the 2nd Infantry Division right about the same time. And I think we were overstaffed. We were overstaffed as far as I know. So I went into a job as um, assistant operations officer in the S3 shop. No platoon or anything like that initially, and then did the NBC course and was the battalion NBC guy. So that's what I did in Korea at Camp Stanley for about 6 months, and then after Camp Stanley, we moved down to I'm sorry, Camp Casey for 6 months. After Camp Casey, we moved down to Camp Stanley in Weishambu.
Okay.
So that's what I did during my year in Korea, and wound up leaving probably a month before the Seoul Olympics, which were 1988.
Okay. And then you did do a company command. So how did you?
Yeah, so from there, went to El Paso to Fort Bliss, and from Fort Bliss, I had two different platoons. Went to Desert Shield and Desert Storm, and then came back to the advanced course, and then had my company command in Hawaii. So my
Okay.
last assignment was there in Hawaii in 25th ID. At the time, we were the only Blackhawk company there. Towards the end, we got the second Blackhawk company, but being the only Blackhawk company, it was quite busy because there were no others in the Pacific, so it was on the go quite a lot.
So you took a platoon to Desert Storm.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that. What kind of missions were you running? What kind of
So,
operations were you running there?
so this was a Blackhawk platoon that was part of 3rd Armored Cav Regiment.
Mhm.
And so we were really the outcast. I mean, we're a Cav, they're heavy tanks, Bradleys, all that good stuff. And we're not attack helicopters. We're just transport helicopters. So they used us for a lot of the ash and trash type missions, moving fuel, moving engines, moving resupply parts, sometimes moving people around. But there was nothing like the, glorified air assault operations or anything along that line. Um, but but Desert Shield and Desert Storm, we picked up our brand new helicopters at the Sikorsky factory,
All right.
landed in El Paso on August 2nd of 90, the year that Hussein invaded Kuwait. And a month later, we are taking those brand new direct from the factory helicopters to Saudi Arabia by ship. So you talk about weird picking up a brand new helicopter at the factory. It truly does smell like when you go into a car
Yeah.
dealership and you get in a brand new car,
Right.
that new car smell, you have a new
Helicopters.
helicopter smell. And you're picking up an aircraft that maybe has 5 flight hours on it, flying it across country from Connecticut to El Paso, and then turning right around and heading off to the sandbox.
Yeah.
That was interesting. But
Yeah.
we we were part of 18th Airborne Corps,
Mhm.
so the group that made the swing up around to the left side. We were on one of the flanks there, and our job was to move fuel, move engines and replacement parts forward. A lot of this occurred before the actual time of crossing the berm, but move that stuff forward so it was pre-positioned when the tanks and the Bradleys would need it as they moved on up.
Well, I was in the 18th Corps, and I
Backhauling.
appreciate it because I was an S4 and I was doing nothing but moving stuff. So I think if
Okay.
you're a man of history,
Uh,
though, if you read your history, you know your history. That the genius of American arms is our ability to scale logistics. So
yes,
I
yes.
think we were in the
And
genius part.
our exactly. And one of the fun things is that our backhaul when we would come back to the south, A couple of times we were bringing Iraqi prisoners that have been captured,
Mhm.
and so having those people in the helicopter with their zip ties, their duct tape over their mouth, and everything like that. Um, they were captured, but they were absolutely so thankful to be in that position and not be on the ground any longer. I mean, that was
Yeah,
truly amazing.
yeah. I had a chance to interact with quite a few of them. I was in the 24th, and yeah, they
Mhm.
were not prisoners as you would think of it. They were liberated. they were they were
Yes,
extremely
that's
happy
truly how they
to have
felt.
survived.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
if they had ticker tape, they'd have thrown it.
right, right.
Yeah, yeah. Good for you. And then, so coming back, company command in Hawaii. What was it like commanding a company in Hawaii after having been in the sandbox?
Um, it was. I mean, it was really unique. I mean, very limited training areas. I mean, is one thing that I would point to compared to Fort Bliss and then being in Saudi and Iraq. I mean, where you have all sorts of space. I mean, you come back to Hawaii and your areas are very limited, and you have such limitations on where you can fly, during what times, how you can fly, all that sort of stuff. So it was a little bit challenging there, and you wound up doing a lot of island hopping where you would have to leave Oahu and fly across the water to one of the other islands to do your training. So that was a bit of a pucker factor, flying across the water, night vision goggles, to go to a different training area.
Sure.
That that takes some getting used to. And anybody who tells you it's comfortable, I think, is lying. I think you never get comfortable flying goggles personally, but that was unsettling and something I had to get used to. Um, we did a couple of trips to JRTC from Hawaii. So you got really experienced at loading and unloading your helicopters, but
Yeah.
it was good stuff.
And then the Clinton drawdowns after your
Hmm.
company command, you felt like you put a pin in it, and then Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, yeah, and I came back to Dallas and went into sales, which is surprising to me. And anybody who really knows me would say that's surprising because I'm not a natural born talker. I'm not someone who will sell ice to Eskimos or talk to the wall or do anything like that. I'm more introverted. But I kind of found that if you take the role of a consultant rather than a salesperson, you listen, you answer to the best of your ability, and if you don't know the answer, then you say, "Hey, I don't know, but I will get back to you."
Right.
It's that follow through. It's that perseverance where you go off and you find the answer, and then you truly do get back with the person. That gives you tremendous respect with whoever you're calling on, and that's been eye opening to me in a way, to see it more as being a consultant rather than a salesperson.
And how did you find that first role? What was the process?
Went through one of the junior officer hiring groups, Lucas
There
Associates.
you go.
That's who I used.
But did you pick Dallas first and then found the job, or how did it? Which led the?
I came to one of their hiring conferences in Dallas, and so most of the roles would be centered
Naturally.
in probably Texas, Louisiana, maybe Oklahoma.
How big a territory did you have? What was your life like when you first got there?
A lot of time in the car, a whole lot of time in the car. We had our daughter Caroline, who was a 2 year old, and then soon had another child on the way, Madeline. So most days, probably close to 300 miles a day in the car, going from one company that uses electronics to another company that uses electronics, and then heading back to the office to do your follow up. Because this is at a time when, if they had a question or they needed a data sheet, it was truly a paper data sheet or a paper book that explained how to use this particular part. It wasn't on the web like we have nowadays. So you had to go back
Send it. Yeah.
to the company office, to the Texas Instruments office, Motorola office, whoever it is, pick it up, and the following day take it back out there. So it was a lot of
Yeah.
that. I got on finally with a really good account that made ATM machines, just like the money machines. And this was a great customer of mine. I also had another one that did security systems for banks and financial institutions where they have the very large tape drives that are recording all this information. But those were two of my better clients that really helped me move forward in that role.
Now, your LinkedIn profile is littered with vice presidential and more executorial roles. So, how did you find yourself back into leadership roles in sales? Or what was that process?
Well, at at Arrow, I moved up pretty quickly from salesperson to field sales manager to general manager for the Dallas branch, and that's where I hired my wife.
There
uh,
you go.
but 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 yeah, that was a really good position because it was a really much of a boom time here in semiconductors.
Right.
When I left that job, everything since has been an individual contributor position, no matter what the title says. I think the titles are misleading, but that's the way these companies want to do it, so that you can walk into a hospital, for
Yeah.
instance, and talk to a chief executive officer, chief operations officer. They want you to have this big elaborate title of vice president or manager when all you're really responsible for is yourself.
Right.
You've got a project manager, a technical person, an interface person who you're working with, but there's no direct line responsibility.
And so you were, you have an area of expertise? How did that develop? It sounds to be an individual contributor. What was it that you were contributing? I guess would be the question.
My my first After Aero Electronics, my first job in the medical world was with a company called
Uh huh.
MediServe, and that is a company that does physical rehabilitation and respiratory care software. And I found that to be really interesting and rewarding. So if you think about a person has a traumatic brain injury, a spinal cord injury, a stroke, and they go in for physical therapy, how much improvement can take place if they've got a good therapist on a good program and they stick to that treatment. So that really was appealing to me, to be able to sell a product software that was used by those people to track the rehab, to get reimbursed for the rehab, and to make sure the patient has a good quality of life and can go back home eventually. So I did that for 13 years. And to brag on myself, I think I got to be really kind of a subject matter expert when it came to rehabilitation and the way all that works.
Okay.
Um, that was very rewarding. Here I wasn't selling just a widget. I was actually doing something that in my mind I could make it where you're doing good for society. You're helping somebody get better
Mhm.
and get back home to their family. So that's what appealed to me. And since 2005, I've been in healthcare IT.
So it was really around the whole theme of rehabilitation.
Yeah, it was rehabilitation, and then it was just developing that. Well, I wouldn't say developing, but continuing that skill you kind of learn, I think, at West Point and through life of do what you say you're going to do, and you can go far. I mean, if you just follow through with what you say you're going to do, and you don't give up easily, I mean, that's a lesson we learned 35 years ago.
Right.
You will be successful, and I think I've kind of figured out the way to apply that to sales, even though, like I said, I'm not an outgoing person.
What other leadership lessons have you found worked in the civilian application that we learned in the Army? What are some of the things you said? Hey, that's a universal principle that we were taught wearing uniform.
I mean, I go back to don't expect your soldiers to do something you're not capable of doing yourself. I mean, I think that is key, and I've always used that with my kids and anybody. I mean, if you're not willing to get your hands dirty doing something, then don't belittle the person who is. You've got to get out there and know that there's no job that's too small. You've got to be able to get your hands dirty, solve the problem yourself. And then over time, you may rise up in the food chain or whatever you want to call it. But it's those people who are doing the dirty work day in and day out that we need to be thankful for.
So be willing to get down in the trench with them and then do what you say you're going to do, or universal principles, right? It's not just military versus
Yeah,
civilian, right? That's great.
right. I agree with that completely.
Yeah. And where are you in your application of your expertise now? What does a day look like for you now?
So now I'm working with a company, Tiger Connect, doing outside sales for hospitals that are 300 beds or larger. So what I do, a lot of times they will have communication, collaboration problems where they're just not efficient. So this is a solution that allows a lot of the information to come over the person's phone from that electronic medical record, so that the phone you carry around all the time has the doctor who's on call for a particular specialty, the alarms that you need to be responding to, the protocol for a stroke patient or a sepsis patient. All that stuff is right there immediately available to you. So that's the role I'm in right now, and I have a territory of about 10 states here in the middle part of the country. And, so far so good. I would certainly like to continue working for probably 5 more years and then look into that retirement of grandkids, dogs, naps, reading, like you said.
Right. I'll wait for you.
Exactly.
What
Hmm.
so looking back at your kind of 20-year, 25-year younger self, what advice would you give yourself coming up through the ranks, or even just
I
level?
think
Yeah.
I think it's important that that you realize that in the quote unquote civilian world, things are not nearly as black and white as we perceive them to be in the military world, or certainly as we did, 35 years ago. You have to temper your expectations a little bit when it comes to that. You have to understand that not everyone is necessarily as highly motivated as we were at a younger age. There are people who are just content to get by, and you've got to learn to accept them, where they are, and that's hard sometimes. That was hard for me when I first started in leadership positions at Arrow, was getting over things being so cut and dried. That there is sometimes a middle ground that has to be considered. So that was a good lesson learned over my time in the civilian world.
Terrific, absolutely terrific. Well, John, what a pleasure talking. And I think if you'd have told me, if we'd been standing in that room in 1985 and they said that guy sleeping over there on the bed is going to end up being a salesman, I'd have said, "You got to be kidding me! He never talks. He's always just plays football. He sleeps all the time."
Yep, that would have been me.
Look at you.
Trying to make it go by quickly.
What a pleasure reconnecting, John. Thanks so much for being here today. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Paul. I've enjoyed it. It's been a lot of fun, and I look forward to seeing you at our next reunion.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Courage Never Quits podcast, where any member of the class of 1986 who is willing to tell their story will be a guest. To get the word out and to stay up to date on the latest episodes, hit the like and subscribe buttons. With 954 living graduates in the class, we have a lot of stories to collect, and you don't want to miss any of them. We'll see you in the next episode.